Rupert Lowe has given Britain the best early Valentine's Day gift possible by promising that Restore Britain will be a national political party fielding hundreds of qualified candidates across the country by the next general election. Now, there are going to be lots of questions about this. Firstly, what is the fate of the other marginal parties on the right? Secondly, who is supporting this? Thirdly, for loyal viewers of this channel, whether or not I am supporting this venture. But allow me to address the concern that Rupert Lowe is going to split the right-wing vote, cause Reform to fall short of a majority, and thereby deliver an election victory to whichever dastardly coalition forms an electoral firewall against Reform, possibly Labour, the Lib Dems, the Greens, even the Tories at this point. Same thing happened in Germany, right? Remember, Restore Britain would not exist without Reform's own actions. Cast your minds back to March of 2025. For the crime of giving an interview in the Daily Mail to Andrew Pearce, in which Rupert Lowe said, yes, Nigel Farage is the Messiah. He will be the presumptive next Prime Minister. Rupert Lowe was working to get him elected as Prime Minister at the time, but in order to make good on the mandate given to Reform by the British electorate, because Reform were polling at plus 30% at the time, they've since subsided around the low to mid-20s, Reform should give to the electorate a policy prospectus, a credible shadow cabinet, and ensure there is a line of succession to follow Nigel Farage, so Reform's once-in-a-generation political opportunity, as Matt Goodwin often puts it, isn't a one-generation party. For that, Zia Yusuf called the police on him on false charges of threatening to kill him, and he had his farmhouse raided and his shotguns confiscated, as well as his staff being subjected to mendacious claims of bullying and the investigations that followed. So, they tried to ruin the man's life, for nothing more than giving an interview which wasn't approved by Reform HQ. And lots of people have also been banished by Reform HQ, not just its local branches, not just former Deputy Leader Ben Habib, but even commentators and local supporters. I've been banned from Reform by HQ for reasons unknown, despite maintaining friendships with people that work at the low staff levels and even some of the senior levels over there, despite local branches and university organisations still inviting me to speak at Reform events. They've been told I'm not on the approved speakers list. So Reform has decided to willfully ostracise their erstwhile supporters in order to chase what they believe is the centre ground vote. Now, I think this is largely an illusion, and their stagnation in the polls seems to be bearing that out, and some of their hemorrhaging of support can be chalked up to their celebration of Tory defectors, playing ship of Theseus with the Conservative Party to reform their party as the Tories and Teal. And I'm not just talking about the Tory defectors. They could plausibly excuse those that rebelled while in government. Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, presumably Miriam Cates when she eventually defects. I'm talking about Nadine Dorries, Jake Berry, Nadim Zahawi, the cabinet ministers of Boris Johnson's government and the architects of lockdown, the Online Safety Act, and the Boris wave that Reform exist to reverse. So, this has meant that among some of their core supporters, they have lost their anti-establishment credentials. And therefore, that's why Rupert Lowe told Peter McCormack in his most recent interview on Peter's podcast that he promises he will provide the electorate with an authentic anti-establishment alternative party to vote for by the next election, be it 2029 or even earlier. And so, he has now come out and announced at his Great Yarmouth event, Restore Britain, the national political party. We'll address some of the other questions I raised at the start, but first, let's take a look at Rupert's announcement video.
I have chosen to speak to you, advance, and more.
Important to note there that Rupert didn't list off Lib Dem, Labour or Greens, unlike Reform, who have taken councillors from those parties, including a Labour Party councillor who was still a member of the Fabian Society when he defected to Reform.
In local politics, we of the past.
Also important to note that on Restore Britain's cross-party board were Susan Hall, the Conservatives' former London mayoral candidate who now sits in City Hall and challenges Sadiq Khan any time he tries to deny the existence of grooming gangs, despite, while he was Shadow Justice Minister in the previous Labour government, writing the foreword to a paper by the Muslim Women's Association that acknowledged the existence of the grooming gangs, and Sir Gavin Williamson, the failed former Education and Foreign Secretary under the Conservatives, who was knighted despite his appalling conduct during lockdowns regarding schools. They have since resigned from Restore Britain because now Restore Britain is an established political party and they would prefer to remain in the Conservatives. So the announcement of Restore Britain as a political party has acted as a kind of sorting mechanism against the failed ministers of the past.
They will be from...
I'm doing my best to avoid breaking out into a Bane impression, but this is ideal. I once said to someone in the Restore circle that the best thing to do was to go full Frank Underwood, where Frank Underwood is meant to give this bland speech with political platitudes about the need for welfare reform, promising the world to his voters to keep people invested in the party, and instead he goes off script and says, sorry, we're just not giving welfare to anyone who doesn't want to work anymore. I'm going to be frank and honest with you, we just can't afford it, so get up off your arse, do the hard work, and the state will support you. But we're not going to back scroungers. And his approval rating goes up because he's the first politician who's actually authentic and realistic with the public about the sacrifices that need to be made for the welfare state to be maintained. And this is the approach. I think people want authenticity, directness, honesty, and credibility rather than promising the earth. And policy that's dictated by whatever benefits the business interests donating to your party from Dubai on any given day.
But for the first time in a very long to leave.
Worthy of note here, when he says foreign national, he doesn't just mean people who have not been given a British passport yet. Under Restore Britain's upcoming remigration policies, let's just say that denaturalisation and deportation will not be ruled out, because the Home Secretary already possesses executive powers to repeal the citizenships, the passports, granted to people if their presence in our country is not conducive to the public good. What matters is defining what is in the public good, and the particular vision of the likes of Restore Britain is patriotic, Christian, and recognises, as Rupert's rhetoric will lay out very shortly, that Britain is not just an economic zone, it is not a global bus station, it is not a global job centre. It is our home, full of our family members and friends. That means Britain is a particular people, and any other people that we do not want here should not be here.
Benefits.
Rupert has already suggested that he will undo the UKification of Britain by forcing those who are on out-of-work benefits and refuse work to go and do litter picking and graffiti cleaning. Great idea. That means not only will the welfare bill shrink because no foreign-born individuals will ever be able to claim any kind of social services, but also it means the indolent in our country, those whose lives are subsidised by the taxpayer so they can go to betting shops and off licenses and just lounge about on the dole all day, will actually be doing something useful for once, and that's beautifying our country again.
We will punish inefficient families.
This doesn't mean, by the way, expanding childcare so women can keep spending more hours in work away from their children. It means changing economic incentives to make single income provider households viable again. And if you want to know how I know this, it's because not only will I have some input into the trajectory of policy for Restore Britain, but so will this chap right here, Charlie Downs, who helped Rupert craft his remarks in the launch announcement, has been doing interviews this morning, ever since Restore announced that they were going to be a national political party, is a dear friend of mine, and got married last year, as did I, in a Catholic church. So we're finding concerns about funding our families to be pretty pressing. Image. What he means by that, by the way, is scrapping all DEI, all public sector equality mandates, stopping the disadvantaging of straight white young native men in our own country, but also removing the cumbersome legislative burdens that people like farmers have to face. I mean, look at the amount of paperwork that Jeremy Clarkson had to fill out just to run his farm, and ultimately running it at either a slim profit margin or a net loss, especially if you took away certain subsidies. So Rupert Lowe, being a farmer himself, being a businessman, having run Southampton Football Club, knows these problems personally. And he's also very sympathetic to young lads like me and the rest of his team who are just getting our start in life, getting a foot on the housing ladder, trying to have families, and finding it all but impossible to get employment anywhere because everyone is advantaged over us in our own ancestral homeland. No thanks, we're scrapping these regulations that are not just suppressing productivity, but are intentionally, racially and sexually disadvantaging the exact kind of young men who build and... Especially when every other mainstream party that's registering in the polling holds fast to a definition of British that cannot be distinct to the native peoples of these isles. Even Reform UK, per Danny Kruger, has said that Reform practices an inclusive civic nationalism that accepts as British anyone from anywhere, no matter their ethnicity or religion, so long as they self-identify as British. It's basically the transgender opinion on sex applied to nationality. It denies reality, and it denies the very real problems presented by the interactions between ethnic and religious communities, with one, the native white Christian British, being far more individualistic than the imported others, clannish, Wahhabist, Salafist, Pakistani communities who prey on their children for racial and religious reasons. You can't understand the problems of modern Britain without understanding who you are seeking to represent in politics, the pre-political we, as Roger Scruton described. You can't expect to make policy for competing groups that have different conceptions of death and rebirth, good and evil, collectivism and individualism, morality, the state, the afterlife. You can't expect to make policy that benefits all of those groups equally, that keeps everyone happy. You have to pick your political constituency, and the constituency of Restore Britain is the native, forgotten majority of these isles, who have inherited and who sustain, by habit and custom, the culture, the history, and the folkways of our isles.
And restore Britain. That will mean banning the burqa, outlawing Sharia law, blocking cousin marriages, and reimposing our Christian-based rule of law. A Restore Britain government would legislate to ensure that no halal or kosher slaughter on British soil. This is Britain, and we will do things our way.
Now, I know about this policy because I've written it. And yes, it does block non-lethal halal slaughter too, because between 80 and 88% of halal slaughter in Britain is pre-stunned, meaning it's a non-lethal stun that basically gives animals an epileptic fit from which they can wake up when their cortisol spikes because they're having their throat slit and they're bleeding to death with full consciousness. And also it will be blocking imports. So we will have 0 non-stun and non-lethal stun halal and kosher meat in Britain, because it's not in keeping with our Christian traditions, and it just doesn't fit our sensibilities as a nation of animal lovers, I'm afraid. We are perfectly entitled to make laws which fit our customs and preferences, and if you don't like it, go and live somewhere else. The reason this announcement is significant is threefold. First, Rupert is marking himself out as the de facto leader of the British right. Secondly, if you notice the aesthetics of this, it was all on the farm. Rupert is leaning into the country gent British Cincinnatus framing that we actually discussed in my interview with him last May, which I'll link down in the description. And the reason that's important is because the best bit of messaging that Nigel Farage has come out with in the last few months is when he was strolling along the seafront and the cliffs in his barber-esque jacket with his dogs talking about military history. It was leaning into the classic English aesthetics. Everyone enjoyed this. The thing with Farage is he needs to cosplay as this, whereas Rupert Lowe is the genuine article. He is a farmer, he has a country estate, and I think this is partially the reason why Jeremy Clarkson has not gotten on board with Nigel Farage yet. You would expect, given Nigel Farage kept showing up to the farmers' protests, that Jeremy Clarkson would have a natural affinity with Reform UK. But he wrote a Sun column recently saying they're not the genuine article. They're promising the world and they're telling you you'll wake up in an Enid Blyton novel the day after the election, but they've got no plan and they've got no personnel that he can believe in. I think, though, Rupert Lowe is kind of the person that Jeremy Clarkson is more likely to throw his lot in with. A bit like Donald Trump in his second term, ahead of the 2024 election, had a bunch of billionaires and people with cultural capital fall in line behind him. They recognised that he had the mandate of heaven, that he had imminent transcendence, the sort of forces of history swirling around him. And the indicators that this is the case is not just that Elon Musk has already reacted to the announcement by saying, join Rupert Lowe and Restore Britain because he is the only one who will actually do it. It's that Duncan Bannatyne has come out and said, wonderful to hear, we chat sometime soon. Now, Duncan Bannatyne, if you remember, is the successful owner of Bannatyne's health and fitness spas. He was formerly on Dragon's Den, and so Deborah Meadham will be waking up this morning absolutely seething that her former co-panelist has seen sense. But also Duncan Bannatyne came out and supported Sir Jim Ratcliffe recently in Ratcliffe's comments that Britain has been colonised by immigrants. Rhetoric that could have come straight from the mouth of Rupert Lowe, or myself. And so Duncan Bannatyne saying he wants to support, potentially invest in Restore Britain is fantastic. And I think that if Restore Britain would like someone to focus on the Scottish part of the British Union, then Duncan Bannatyne is probably the perfect person for that. Because, being frank, I've always lived in London and in the south. I went to university in Canterbury. I have only visited Scotland once. I have some affection for our countrymen beyond Hadrian's Wall, but I would never presume to speak for them, and I don't think Rupert would either. Rupert is a quintessential Englishman. But Duncan Bannatyne is a titan of industry, and also knows and loves his country well. And if you're getting the dispossessed, pissed-off billionaires recognising Rupert's legitimacy, then I think you're going to see an elite preference cascade towards Restore Britain that we actually haven't seen towards Reform UK. And this is why Reform UK have gone to Dubai and are courting investment from Indian, Iranian, and Muslim billionaires. Remember, lots of Reform UK's donors are just Bradfordian Muslims that Zia Yusuf has met in the gym. This was the express purpose of putting Zia Yusuf in after he gave the party £200,000. Whereas Restore Britain is explicit in not wanting any foreign politicians. Therefore, it won't take donations from foreigners or those with vested interests that do not lie in seeing Britain restored. And so Restore provides a viable vehicle for Britain's pissed-off, native, breakaway elite class to invest in. And the other interesting person to pick up on here is Michaela Peterson. Now, Michaela Peterson has been following Rupert Lowe's career. She's saying this is vitally important. And no matter one's thoughts on Michaela Peterson personally or Jordan's output since he joined the Daily Wire, and God willing he rehabilitates soon, I know he's very unwell, it's very important because she is central to the ARC project. And the ARC project has done all it can to promote both Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage because of the deep investment in ARC, in the Legatum Institute, in GB News, etc. by Paul Marshall, who now favours Nigel Farage. And so the fact that people in the ARC sphere are saying Rupert Lowe is vitally important, it means he can't be ignored. There will be people watching this going, well, Advance UK already exists, why didn't Rupert Lowe come in and take over Advance? I think there are a few reasons for this, and this is not to disparage anyone who is an Advance supporter because they felt betrayed by Reform and wanted a viable populist vehicle. I think lots of people are trying to cling to any life raft that comes their way because they're rightfully petrified about Britain being submerged in a demographic tide. And so Ben Habib set up Advance UK, but I think Rupert was right in saying that it has the name and branding of a tube of toothpaste, and it has used a lot of AI in its promotional materials, which codes slop to anyone below the age of 40 and who doesn't spend most of their time on social media on Facebook. Not trying to be insulting, this is just the reality of politics and presentation in the social media age. And so it's very encouraging that Ben Habib, despite sinking significant time and investment into Advance UK, has said he's going to be meeting with the college this week and deciding whether to capsize Advance and fold it in behind whatever the hell Rupert is doing. Now, I think it is important to send the following message to people in Advance UK. Do not expect Restore Britain to have a college. Do not expect it to be democratic. I would say expect more of a model of what Curtis Yarvin called the hard party. And I would say you should be encouraged by that rather than discouraged, because I think Rupert has proven himself to have the best of intentions and very good instincts and leadership capability at this point. I think the problem most people had with Reform was a worry that it would turn into Nigel Farage's vanity project and that policy and personnel would be inconsistent based on whatever mood Nigel Farage woke up in on any given day. And so people wanted, as a contingency plan against Reform, becoming Nigel Farage's vanity project, or it being handed off to Zia Yusuf, the party to be democratised so the base could vote against leadership changes. I don't think you have to worry about that with Restore Britain. And so I wouldn't worry about a non-democratic party structure. I think trust Rupert Lowe to ascend to the Caesar position, and trust that he will make the right personnel selections. And I think the fact that Ben Habib trusts Rupert Lowe should be an indication to advanced supporters that it's time to follow him. And so this should be a signal to other marginal parties. For egos to be set aside, for them to be folded, and for you to follow Rupert Lowe. I think this suggestion will only be unpopular with people who think they should be the guy, rather than recognising that Rupert is the guy. And I have recognised that long ago. This is why I've never wanted to be an MP, because I know my role. I'm not a particularly social person. I'm more focused on policy and messaging. I'm good on infrastructure, I'm good on detail, I am not good on campaigning in a Wetherspoons on a Friday afternoon. So I realise what I'm cut out for and what I'm not, and I am not the guy. But I do think Rupert is. Having met him, having worked with him, having seen how he treats people, having seen the magnanimity with which he deals with people that are just invested in restoring the country. I think he's the man. And so the question will come, am I supporting Restore Britain? I think the hat stays on. There are good people in reform, and we should still put our efforts into ensuring that if they are going to become the next party of government, well, they're a bit less shit than they currently are. This is not a discouragement for the good people who are working at Reform HQ, may still watch my content. I still hope Matt Goodwin becomes an MP, for example. And I know lots of you will have scrubbed your social media clean and signed up as potential reform candidates, and that's great. We need our guys on the inside. But those of you who can't stomach staying silent within an institution that compels your compliance to whatever whims Nigel Farage invents on any given day just to get ahead, well, it's time to pour all of your resources into Restore Britain. Anons, if you're particularly talented in making hype edits, go out there and do it. For all the people in Restore Britain circle. Charlie Downs, Harrison Pitt, and of course, Rupert Lowe. We need you amplifying every post. We need your suggestions for policy. We need you nudging people in our space, politely, encouragingly, to recognise Rupert's legitimacy. We were already seeing it. Widespread support across the online right and their audience. We're seeing an outpouring of relief that Rupert Lowe has finally picked up the crown from the gutter and recognised that this is what people want. This is the time to throw your support behind Restore Britain, because I think they're going to do some very good things. Oh, and keep an eye on their website for an upcoming policy paper on halal and kosher slaughter. I think you're all going to enjoy it.